Hello, welcome to the breakout for the Inheritance of Hope Family Reunion, naming and sharing your story both in want and plenty. My name is Meredith McDaniel, and I am a licensed professional counselor here in Davidson, North Carolina. This is my counseling practice, Milk and Honey Counseling, and usually I get to meet with people in my office and sit together and have the great honor of hearing about people's stories. Both the ups and downs that people walk through in this life. And so I hope over the next 45 minutes to an hour that we get together, you get a deeper glimpse into your own story and what it looks like to name the places that have been hard, but you've also maybe experienced some of the greatest joy, maybe in light of the greatest heartache of most of your lives. Today I want to start with a poem that I wrote actually a couple years ago. I was working on my first book called In Want and Plenty, and it is right here. And my mentor, my friend Bobby Campbell, actually had an aneurysm and passed away right in the middle of me writing this book. And she was someone who was walking alongside of me in my life and in my story. And I got the opportunity to write a poem for her celebration of life service. And so I actually only included kind of the broader parts of the poem in my actual book, and all the alternating stanzas that I read in entirety at her service. I decided just to give to her family. But I hope that you will find some hope and some light in the midst of the heavy and heartache in your own life and in your own story through this poem. So we're going to start out with that. There's going to be a few different things that I read and a few different things that I play for you to listen to throughout our time together. I really want you to be able to sit back and experience this time. And not just feel like you need to jot down notes or remember everything I've said, but more that you'll walk away from this time feeling like you experienced a new window of peace and joy into your story together. So the name of this poem is called Life in the Ebb and Flow. And here is the layout on this page. It's the very beginning of the book. It says, in this life, we await what is to come. We ache, we laugh, we love, and we live, yearning for the already not yet and glimpsing of the goodness right in our midst. We flail when storms brew, doubting, grasping for a hope that will satisfy. The clouds darken, the rain rhythms, then soaks, and all we want is relief. We birth, breathe, celebrate, grieve, create, and yet spend our lives longing for more. If we could just hold in our hands what we think we need, we say, then maybe peace. Moment by moment, we find ourselves feasting or falling, reveling or revealing. We try to hold it all together, forgetting that we have a God who holds us in his hand. We try to cling to what we know is true, seeking refuge as the cruel waves crash. Getting lost in a game of performance and appearance, we hide our deep and dark. In our struggle, we lose sight of the glory. In our story, we must hunt for his hand. We look in every place here on this broken earth when contentment is found beyond. So we ponder, how can we let the current carry us when life unfolds unexpectedly, when we unravel in our raw reflections of a God who claims he is close by, even in this? We are manna makers, doctors, neighbors, lovers, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, living our everyday in the messy and mundane, chaotic and clumsy controlled corners. Full life, the kind we all keep trying to unearth, is found right here in the ebb and flow. So I wanted to start with that poem today because I think it gives us a glimpse into just the both-and-ness of this world. If you are connected to Inheritance of Hope That means that you either have a diagnosis, someone you love has a diagnosis, or you're coming around and alongside those who are experiencing some level of suffering and trauma in their life. And so part of my work as a counselor is helping people, again, navigate their own story and figure out what it looks like to find the hope and the light in the midst of the dark and heavy. It's an opportunity for us to name the parts of our story that we might not fully understand, to see our narrative and our story in the grander, bigger scheme of the grander narrative that God is writing in our lives and in humanity as a whole. I grew up in a church here in North Carolina, and I'll be honest with you, it was one of those things that we did on Sundays and Wednesdays, and it was just kind of a routine and a rhythm and something that you do in the South. And it wasn't until middle school that life for me really hit hard. I had a middle school Bible study leader, my dear friend, my sister's dear friend, her mom, or their mom, who actually was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, again, when we were in middle school. And so I spent at least 2 hours with this beautiful woman every single week, learning a little bit about God, even though I was really skeptical about who he was, and he felt so far away from me as a little middle school girl at the time, who had my own hard stuff in my life. And all of a sudden, this woman who I trusted and really looked up to and was the mom of my dear, dear friends was diagnosed with a terminal illness of brain cancer. And so, as a 13-year-old, I was trying to make sense of the world and why a good God would allow something like this to happen. So, we went through weeks and weeks of different kinds of treatments, and things just progressed very quickly for her. And I remember being in the hospital the last night that she took her last breath, and I got to have a few moments with her by myself, and I will remember those moments for the rest of my life. And they actually, I think, started me off on a trajectory for what would end up being my calling, which is doing counseling. And I had no idea that I would get involved with Inheritance of Hope eventually down the road. And a lot more things happened from that point and that first diagnosis that I encountered with someone close to me up until now, almost, 25, 30 years later. And so back in that hospital room that night, we were surrounded with a lot of tears, a lot of sadness, knowing that we would not get to be with our dear friend much longer. So I got to walk back into the hospital room and see her sitting in her hospital bed. She was still pretty lucid and talking to me, and she held my hands, and I just remember the room felt like time had sort of stopped for a moment, and she held my hand, and she was so sweet and so tender, and said to me, there's more for me. I'm gonna miss you, I'm gonna miss the girls, but there's more for me beyond this place. And that has really stuck with me, and that's a legacy that she has left in my life. Again, decades later, just with those small, powerful words that she, I know shared with me, but probably shared with every single person that came into the holy space of right before she left Earth, and where I believe she went to be with Jesus eternally. And so I share that story with you because the small phrases, the small interactions that we take from our story and our narrative can have such a great, deep impact on the other people around us. The woman who co-started Inheritance of Hope, Kristen Milligan, along with her husband Derek, which I know many of you have interacted with, that are such salt to the earth, such an amazing family, all of her beautiful children, which you can actually see pictured in her book that I know many of you are going to get to read through if you haven't already. are right here on this beautiful bridge when they were little, and they're all grown up now. But her book is called Consider It Pure Joy, A Mother's Fears and God's Gift of Peace. And I'm sure many of you know the story of Inheritance of Hope, but I thought I would just share just kind of my own summary and what I've seen over the last decade in being involved with this beautiful organization. So when Kristen and Derek got the diagnosis for Kristen and started going through all of her treatments and all of her surgeries over the years, they decided that they were going to use their story to help other people. And that's why you guys are sitting in this breakout session here in 2020 during a pandemic, getting to glean all the wisdom of all these speakers and musicians and volunteers and staff that are involved with Inheritance of Hope. And it's all because of the way that God stirred in Kristen and Derek's heart and their family and all their extended family and friends to be able to use their story to bring hope, an inheritance of hope, and a legacy of hope to others. And here's the thing, each of you get to also do that. So back at the very end of Kristen's book, it's on page 164, I wanted to read just this short paragraph to you where she says, I believe that God blesses us all when we face tragedy and heartache. I would like to suggest that perhaps the greater the trial, the more miraculous the blessings that can come from it. But I believe our response to God dictates whether or not we recognize and accept these blessings. If our hearts are willing, our greatest trials can be used by God to produce the most beautiful fruit. So she's saying right here that it's actually a choice that we make, what we're going to do when we face tragedy and heartache in this life. And she says that the greater the trial, the more miraculous, perhaps, the blessings that can come from it. And so that's my question to you today as you're listening to this, as you hear a little bit more about my story, a little bit more about the story of Inheritance of Hope. I really challenge each of you to think about what is the impact that my story, my tragedy, my heartache can have on others. And here's the thing. I know that everybody listening today is in a different place. I know that some of you are recently diagnosed. Some of you are in remission. Some of you have been around Inheritance of Hope for a long time and you are not sick and you don't have somebody directly in your family and in your daily life that is sick. But we have all been touched by the brokenness of the world and the brokenness of our bodies here on earth. And so my challenge to you is to ask the question, what is my story? And what impact will it have? And how can I name it? How can I articulate it to others? How can I reveal it to others just by the way that I live my life? Because if you think about that small quiet moment in a hospital room with my friend years ago and the power of that moment that it had on me, and then you think about the impact that Kristen and Derek and their whole family and all their friends, the whole organization of Inheritance of Hope has had on so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families all across the world and will continue to for years and years to come. Thanks to each of you and your support and your involvement and your continued stories in this organization. They both have rich, vibrant hope that is offered, whether it was quiet and small and no one heard it maybe but me, or if it is reaching what feels like the ends of the earth in a big organization like Inheritance of Hope. Because I believe that God looks at both the quiet and the loud and everything in between and says, this is a story worth living. Till the day that we take our last breath, we can find joy in the midst of our sorrow. And so I'm actually going to give you guys just about 3 or 4 minutes to listen to a song that is very near and dear to my heart. And I will be sure to send the link to you guys connected to this breakout so you can listen to it beyond today. But I have a couple dear friends, one of which who walked through a kidney transplant with his wife about, goodness, I think 8 or 9 years ago at this point. And they know what it looks like to stare very scary surgeries in the face and to walk through that and come out on the other side with a different body and yet peace. And so I would love to share this with you guys. My other friend who co-wrote the song is a few years younger than me and actually on the path to becoming a counselor herself. And she's experienced a good amount of heartache in her life as well, even at her young age. And so the two of them got together and wrote this song called You've Given Me Joy. And I would just challenge you, either sit back and close your eyes and just let the words just wash over you. I pray that they would be healing for you. You could also grab out some paper and just kind of jot down whatever comes to mind for you. And this is going to be a transition into the next section of this time that we have together, where I'm going to introduce the idea of narrative journaling to you, which is a tool that I have used with my clients in my own life and also in my book to be able to help people, again, name their story and figure out what it looks like to have an impact and be manna makers in this world. So we'll unpack a little bit more of that in a few minutes. I'm going to turn this song on for you, and I hope that you'll be able to hear it. And I'm actually going to step away from the screen while you listen, so I will not be a distraction. So I'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Plenty in want and in all in between. You've planted a seed of delight in my being. Should days they grow long in the cold shadowland, or life overflow with the gifts of your hand. So deep in my soul where your spirit may rise, as water through root makes its way to the skies. For sometimes in darkness and sometimes in light, I am assured and alive. You've given me joy, so joy I will sing, breathing the fullness that only you can bring. Lord, hear my laugh, the sure offering. I choose to rejoice in you in everything. I know I can trust you. Gone on a journey, lost camino, feast chance to grow old, dancing and weeping and welling of hope, tearful goodbyes and a harvest and a lay, one celebration of loss now returned, filling of loves that will sing through the night, death of a season that leads to new life, running the fields as your mending secures, Jesus my place beside yours. You give me joy, I will sing, breathing the fullness that only you can bring. Lord, hear my life, your offering. I choose to rejoice in you in everything. You give me joy, I will sing, breathing the fullness that only you can bring. Lord, hear my life, it's your offering. I choose to rejoice in you in everything. I know I can trust you. I know I can trust
All right, friends. Oh, it was such a gift for me, and I hope it was for you to get to listen to those lyrics. And again, I'll get you a link to that beautiful song that my friends wrote, and make sure that you can read the words because they are packed full with just hope. Again, in regards to the hard things that come our way in this life. And I thought while I was listening to that, just the importance of taking time when you're feeling kind of at the end of your rope. And I know that we're all probably in different places in regards to what we believe about God, this creator that again at times can feel so far away, and how he felt for me in middle school as a young girl who had a lot of questions about why hard things happen in this life. And that's a whole nother conversation that we could go down that path. But I will say that over the years, as I've continued to see more and more hard things happen, I've lost a lot of loved ones and friends and family over the years to all different types of things in this life. And just looking around at the state of our world, right, just after an election, in the midst of racial reconciliation that is still a process for us, especially in this country, and then again the obvious of coronavirus, that we just don't know how long it's going to last. I want to be really honest and transparent with you and say that makes me doubt and question the goodness of our God, maybe even daily sometimes. And yet, at the end of the day, I feel like the only thing I know to do is to kind of hand my story and my life and those around me that I love back over into the care of the one who we were just hearing them sing about, is someone who is good and that we can trust, and that we can find peace and joy in the midst of everything else that's swirling around us. Earlier, you might have heard a lawnmower driving by, and just to keep it real, my husband is out picking up tons of branches and limbs and twigs because we had a really crazy hurricane force wind storm this morning here in Davidson. And I was watching with my kids who are virtually schooling and who are all having their own levels of heartache right now and their little individual stories. Look out the window and in both awe and wonder of the power of that wind and that storm, and trying to trust that these big oak trees in our yard were not going to fall on our house and that we were going to be okay. I've been reading the book The Wizard of Oz to my 7-year-old daughter, and I was just amazed early on in the book where it talks about when, and again I was thinking about this morning during the storm, but when Dorothy's house is picked up and is swirling around in Kansas. And I know some of you guys might have experienced tornadoes, actual tornadoes before, and so you know this feeling better than I do. But Dorothy, even in the midst of the storm, in the midst of her fear, she decides she's actually going to curl up in her bed and fall asleep, because she says that she knows that she's going to be okay. She has this confidence deep within her. And I don't know if Dorothy, actually acknowledged God as her savior and somebody that she could have a relationship with. But reading between the lines, I do think that she was entrusting her life and her story into a bigger, grander narrative. And so I do want to lead you guys through an exercise, again, from In Want and Plenty, from my book, that is called narrative journaling. And I really love that when I get to sit with my clients, and even just in talking to friends and family, and even to my kids, I get to ask them these deep questions, and we can talk about the simplicity of life, but also the complexity of life together. And it really helps us know how to, again, name our story, and helps us to see really what is beyond what is right here in the present, but also the context of both our past, present, and our future, and where we can find hope and healing in the midst of all of it. So I like to call this process revisioning. And so I define it as the shifting of one's lens in life, especially in the light of further evidence. So we've got these 3 categories that I talked about, one of which is looking back. So that's looking back at our past. And let's be honest, most of us, we don't want to look back at our past. We want to either talk about what's going on right now, how we feel right now, or we want to look ahead. And the second is be still. So whatever is currently happening in us, it requires us to be still and be present. Again, when we were listening to the music a few minutes ago, it helped me be very present and still in my body. It was very calming to me, and it just made me feel good after taking the time to actually say, I'm in this room right now, and I'm listening to these beautiful voices and hearing these words that are giving me images of joy in the midst of sorrow. And the third one is scanning the horizon. So that would be obviously more future oriented. And then the next thing that I like for us to look at, so the first big idea was revisioning. The second big idea is restoring. So what I mean by that is it's this experiential process of rewriting one's storyline through that revisioning process. So we actually, I believe that we have not only a creator in God, but we also have a author of our story. And so we get to not only co-create, so you think about whatever your job is, or whatever art you make, or your parenting that you do every day, or the quiet work that you do that no one ever sees. All of that, I would say, is co-creating with God. But we also get to co-author our story with Him. And that is a place where I have found great hope. When I've lost friends, when my mentor passed away, when Kristen passed away, other friends who I've had multiple friends back to back in the last year who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. There's also different levels of anxiety and depression that both I experience and other people that I care about in my life experience, and obviously all of my counseling clients, all the stories that I hear from them. And so for me to find hope and to know that I can actually restory my life with the help of the God who is in charge and holds the whole universe in his hands. It's a reminder to me that we're not slipping through, and that we actually get to play a role in this process of rewriting our story. So then the final piece of it is resound. And if you end up getting a copy of my book at any point, you'll see at the end of every chapter, there's a section called Resound. And I talk about how that is the intentional act of slowing down to listen to music that helps heal. And so I gave you just a taste of that a few minutes ago with that song, You've Given Me Joy. But there is a beautiful song that I sort of handpicked that's at the end of each of these chapters. And then there's a bunch of questions that kind of pair with the chapters that help you dig deeper into your story. And so I'm going to give you just a sampling of a few of those questions right now. And we can provide these for you after the breakout session as well. So the first question, these are just what I call the back to basic questions. And this is just you getting to know your story a little closer. And I'm not talking about just your current story, just to clarify. I'm talking about your whole story from the moment that you were knit together in your mother's womb. And when you were born into this world and you started walking around on this earth and interacting with your family, and everything leading up to this point, from the moment that either you got a diagnosis, somebody close to you did, or even just you see the heartache and the pain of this world. And maybe it's all of the above. So this first question, and you can just think about these just for a couple minutes. I want to help you kind of practice entering deeper into your story. Because here's the thing, we've got to know our story before we can name it, and then be able to share our story with other people. And again, those can be really small conversations, sitting in a treatment center, in a chemo room, with somebody who drops off a meal to you, with the person at the checkout line at the grocery store, standing on a stage in front of a ton of people, in the quiet of your car when your kid out of nowhere asks you why you're sick. So the first question is, how were you raised? That's a big one. So how were you raised? What did it look like in your daily family dynamics? What's your relationship with your mom like? Your dad? Maybe you've lost one or both of them. Maybe one of them you never knew. What about your siblings, your extended family? What are the things that you've tried to forget about? The things that tend to rise up in your mind at different big milestone moments in your life. And I will, just as a disclaimer, say that if you start digging into some of these questions and you start to feel yourself a little anxious or feeling like you need extra support, I'm definitely also going to list some resources of some counseling practices and just some practical online resources to be able to help you kind of delve deeper into your personal story as well, so that you don't have to do that alone, because I don't think we were made to do this alone. I charge my readers in this book to make sure you grab a friend or a small group to walk through this with. And I also know that that's very vulnerable. So I'm praying for all of you, just even as I ask you these questions and consider thinking about them. So the next question is, I love this one. What did you love when you were little? So what just made you so excited? Like, I think about my kids right now, and they're really into Harry Potter and Pokemon cards, and my daughter loves playing with her horses on the floor, and she loves me reading her Wizard of Oz and other random books at night. They love going outside, and right now I can see them, they're picking up sticks. This is like our old favorite game, because we kind of live out in the country. Like, all right, kids, we're all going to go outside and we're going to pick up sticks, and they all like it for about 5 minutes and then they're over it. But my daughter loves like running out to our chicken coop or our garden and checking on things that have grown, telling me that I need to feed the chickens, or that we've got an overflow of eggs, or that we have an unexpected chick in our yard. So she loves being outside. So yeah, if you think about yourself as a child, you think about even your kids, what are the things that really made you come alive when you were little? All right, and then my next question is, what memories do you have from grade school? Again, maybe something that you might want to forget, or middle school or high school. What were your greatest disappointments from, grade school, middle school, high school, even college? That could be probably a long and funny list if we talk to your friends back in the day. There's only two more from this section. The next one is, what has broken your heart? So if you look out into the world, what breaks your heart? Again, it's not hard to look out at the world right now and see all of the brokenness. What is it that specifically penetrates your heart the most? Because I would argue that is probably also a gift that God has given you specifically in your story that you have a special heart for. I know for me, again, as a counselor, really love being able to enter into people's stories. And so when I was young, I never learned like card games or board games, because if there was a group of people playing those, I was usually the one on the side of the room in the quiet corner talking to somebody who was sad or listening to them. And at the time, it made me feel very, awkward and weird. And yet that has become my greatest gift. And I'm now, later in life, now that my kids want to play games and board games and cards, slowly learning how to do those things. But they don't come naturally to me and easy to me. And so I wonder what it is from your childhood that stands out, that is a highlight or a low light for you. And then lastly, even in the midst of your heartache, and again, I'm not going to pretend to know what you're walking through specifically, but I would love to hear what makes, well, I'm not going to get to hear from you, but I would love for you to write about, that's the hard part of not being in a room with each of you. Normally I would love to go around the room and hear all of your answers. So you'll have to do that with your family members, or maybe grab a friend this week and circle back to some of these questions. You guys could re-listen to this together and share together. What makes you come alive currently? Okay, so I never knew I was going to write a book. This is something that God called me to do because I had a lot of stories that I wanted to share with people, and to see and to show how I have seen God's hand in the midst of lots of different people's, again, ups and downs of their life stories. But writing has become such a healing outlet for me over the years. And many mornings, I do this little practice called morning pages. Some of you might have heard of it before, by this woman named Julia Cameron. And she just tells you to get up and just to write 3 pages. Don't even think about it. It can be like, I need to make sure I need to change the laundry over, or get gas in my car today. Or it could be as deep as, some conversation that you want to have with the Lord and you want to wrestle something out with Him. So it's just this way of kind of clearing the cobwebs. And so that's something that's made me feel alive currently. I wonder what that is for you. So take a few minutes just to think about, some of these back to the basics questions. This is just kind of a little teaser and a little taste for all the questions that I have at the end of each chapter. I would like to introduce, we've got just a little bit more time together, and I would love to introduce this idea of manna and hunting for manna in our life. When I first started writing my book, I thought that it would be called manna because what you'll find, and you'll probably notice this from the cover where you see the desert and the sky, is I was basing this whole narrative off of the Exodus narrative in the Bible. And if you don't know much about the Exodus narrative, that's no big deal. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. But basically, in the Old Testament of the Bible, so that's before Jesus was here on earth in the New Testament, Moses, which you might have heard about the burning bush, and the Israelites who end up out in the desert wandering around for 400 years, God actually provides for them after they come out of their slavery in Egypt and they enter into the desert and they're wandering around trying to trust God, trying to trust Moses as their leader, their fearless and at times hesitant leader. they are crying out and they're grumbling and they're hungry and they're doubting God. And I don't know about you guys, but again, I can feel like that on a daily basis sometimes. And I know that that's probably true for many of you as well. And so they start grumbling and crying out to God. And I love that we have, I believe, a God who can hold all of that for us, that we don't have to pretend like we have it all together. We don't have to hide that from him. We get to actually just bring our whole selves and all of our emotions to him. He decided to provide food for them in the form of this flaky white substance called manna. And if you actually look back in the Bible in Exodus, you get to see the translation of the word manna actually means, what is it? So even back then, 2,000 plus years ago, they were asking the question, what is it? What is this, God, in our life that you have brought in our life or you've allowed in our life? We can't wrap our minds around it. And so he provides it for them every single day. It's just as much as they need. You might want to equate that to our modern phrasing of our daily bread, right? Like in the Lord's Prayer. Some of you might have heard that or might know it by memory. Might say it in your church, might have heard somebody say it when you were growing up. But yeah, he provides this manna and they're not supposed to store it up. The very first verse actually in my book that I start out with is from Matthew 6:26, where it says, I long to be like the birds who do not sow or reap or store away in barns, because they trust that God's going to give them all that they need every day. And I just was talking about how I want to live my life more like that. I want my story and my hope to reflect a trust in God that is beyond myself and beyond this world and beyond my broken body and beyond my broken mind. And I have found great healing in that and transformation in that. And so again, I shared early on that it's really easy for us to look around in life at all the heartache, especially when we're facing a diagnosis. And we feel sick and we feel like we can't get out of bed or we can't go on another day. To be able to find the manna, so again, that daily bread or that sliver of light, that gift in every day. And so you might have heard of the book, 1,000 Gifts by Ann Voskamp. And around the time that Kristen was kind of in her final months here on earth, that book was very impactful for me. And I actually was reading it with my late mentor at the time, and I was telling her just about Kristen's story and about the legacy that she was leaving through Inheritance of Hope. And we started keeping a list of a gratitude list that Anne likes to call it, where we could note down our 1,000 gifts. And so every day I would just start writing down different things like, I saw a bluebird in the tree today, and I love bluebirds, so it was such a gift. Or I was riding down the road and this song came on the radio, and I felt like only God knew that I needed to hear that song and that line in that moment. Or maybe I would pick up a book and, it would be just a couple sentences of something that I needed in that moment that I didn't even know that I needed, but God was uniquely tailoring it to me in that moment. And so I started coining this term, a manna moment. So I started this hashtag on Instagram. You guys are welcome to be a part of that. I would love to see you guys start to track the manna moments in your story. And it's become this beautiful community of people, both online and in my personal daily life, where we get to encourage each other and really get to be hunters of beauty together, and say, hey, like, my life is really hard. Like, I can say that in one hand because of this or that. And in the other hand, at the exact same time, I can say, but here's some light and here's some good, and I can hold both together. And again, that's why actually I named my book In Want and Plenty, because it's based off of that verse. We're talking about how we can be content, and beyond content, be at peace, whether we are in want and plenty. And they sing a little bit about that in the song we listened to earlier too. So I love how the Lord has just orchestrated this whole thing together. it is my heartbeat that we would learn to be what I like to call manna makers in this world that you might have heard me refer to in the poem earlier. We could just learn about our story and find healing and get a deeper glimpse into what it's going to look like beyond earth, in heaven, but here on earth, and get to taste of that land of milk and honey. Or we could actually let our story, in addition to that, impact other people. And so what I have seen through the Milligan family is watching them be manna makers through Inheritance of Hope specifically. And then you look at each of them and they all have their own unique gift sets. Like Lanta, you'll see, I don't know if you can see right here, but I've got this beautiful canvas that she made me a few years ago that I asked her if she would make. That just says, I will deliver you from the wilderness and take you to a land flowing with milk and honey. And that's just kind of the heartbeat of my counseling practice, is that I want to be able to sit with people in their story. And the way that I want to be a manna maker is to help them taste of the land of milk and honey, i.e. the promised land, heaven, here on earth, because we don't need to live our whole life just living for heaven. We need to figure out what it looks like to taste of that here. And so my charge to you in our last couple minutes, if you're brave enough to delve deeper into your story, to start to look back at your past, to look at your current situation, and to look ahead to your future and find hope there, and right here where you are, then would you also become a manna maker with me? Would you try to discover the gifts that God has given you uniquely in this world? And the truth is, none of our days, we don't know the number of our days, but we have a creator and a author in God who does. He knows, I don't have a diagnosis today. I do have a terminal diagnosis, and I know that my body will not last forever. And so what does it look like for me? What does it look like for you, wherever you find yourself today, to go out into the world and live with everything that we have got, everything that you've got, and to use your gifts for the glory of God, not for yourself, but to use your story in a way that impacts the world and can actually end up being manna for other people. So before I get too emotional, I'm going to just leave it there. And it just brings me such great joy to sit with each of you and to encourage you in your walk and to breathe some hope and some life into your story right where you are. Stay connected to this family, continue to be involved, and use all the resources that are being given this weekend during this reunion, but also always check back to the website. And if you want to check out my book, I would love for you to do it, not because it's my book, but because it's something that God has woven together that is a lot of stories of a lot of people where I've gotten to see the hand of God in their life in the midst of really hard and dark situations where He has brought His light and His love. And I hope that for you, I pray over you and your people right now that you would start to experience more peace and more joy in the midst of your heartache every single day, that you would be manna makers in this world that desperately needs you. Thanks for listening, and hope to stay connected to many of you through social media and just through other resources out here in the world. So thank you guys. Love you.